everywhere you look, people are talking about Tucker Carlson. It seems like every time I open up Twitter or social media anywhere, there's some new story about him. The most recent, as of right now, could be more that's come out now. The most recent by the New York Times. It's a tweet that they put out. It says a text message sent by Tucker Carlson that set off a panic at the highest levels of Fox on the eve of its billion-dollar defamation trial showed its most popular host sharing his private, inflammatory views about violence and race. Okay, that sounds pretty bad, but remember, this is the New York Times, so you should always approach anything they say with skepticism because, well, history and track record. Come on. So you open it up, and I found the text. First off, if this is an actual text message, Tucker puts more time and effort into writing text messages than some people put into writing novels. I mean, this is a long text message, and it's well written. So I'm going to read it to you guys, and I'll let you decide whether you think this is awful, defamatory, horrible, as the New York Times tries to describe it to be. And then we'll break down some parts of it. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching video of people fighting on the street in Washington. Again, this is supposedly a text message. Who sends text messages this well written? I guess Tucker. A group of Trump guys surrounded an Antifa kid and started pounding the living shit out of him. It was 3 against 1 at least. Jumping a guy like that is dishonorable, obviously. It's not how white men fight. Okay, we'll get back to that part. Yet suddenly I found myself rooting for the mob against the man, hoping they'd hit him harder, kill him. I really wanted them to hurt the kid. I could taste it. Then, somewhere deep in my brain, an alarm went off. This isn't good for me. I'm becoming something I don't want to be. The Antifa creep is a human being. Much as I despise what he says and does, much as I'm sure I'd hate him personally if I knew him, I shouldn't gloat over his suffering. I should be bothered by it. I should remember that somewhere, somebody probably loves this kid and would be crushed if he was killed. I don't care about those things. If I reduce people to their, if I don't care about those things, if I reduce people to their politics, how am I better than he is? Okay, that's the text message that the New York Times claimed was, quote, private inflammatory views about violence and race. Now, no doubt about it, that's a very private, introspective reflection that he had about his own human nature when it came to violence and wishing harm upon those with whom you disagree. However, what I see when I see this is, if you're familiar with Carl Jung and shadow work, it's essentially confronting the ugliest parts of ourselves. What I see here is basically shadow work. It's Tucker having the realization that he's having these feelings and they're bad, and he should confront them and deal with them and reject them because they go against everything he stands for. In my opinion, it makes me kind of like the guy more that he's able to have that self-reflection and what's the proper term I'm thinking of here? Awareness, self-awareness. Sorry, it's early. I haven't had enough coffee yet. So I don't think it's as bad or anywhere near as bad, actually, as the New York Times is making it out to be. Here's a guy saying, I saw my enemy getting hurt. At first, I wanted him to get hurt, but then I humanized him and I confronted myself with the fact that that's somebody's kid and that's another human with the right to live, just like me. So this is the horrible text message that they're talking about. Now, the one part that jumps out at people and that gave the New York Times a little bit of ammunition to say, race or racial undertones are racist is that one sentence, it's not how white men fight. Now, I will absolutely concede at face value that's a little like, who talks like that, right? I don't think it's racist. He's a white man. So when I hear stuff like that, anytime someone's being accused of being racist or whatever, I always like to put it through sort of the machine of different scenarios, put different races in place of other races to see if it's truly racist, because there are some things that we just, out of human nature in our shared history, you can say the exact same thing, put one race in the sentence and it's awful, swap out another race in the sentence and it's sort of innocuous, it's benign, right? So what I see when I see that is someone who's saying, hey, that's not what we do. Now, if you heard someone say, hey, that's not what Asian people do, they don't gang up on people, that wouldn't be very inflammatory. If you heard someone say, that's not what black guys do, we don't do that. I've heard that expression many times when it comes to skydiving or mountain climbing or any kind of like white guy activity that, it's stereotyped. Swimming and, in the deep ocean, scuba diving stuff, whatever, you hear all these tropes like black guys don't do that, you white guys are crazy for doing that kind of stuff. You hear that all the time. And so essentially, yeah, it's using a generalization. He's talking about his own race. He's talking about the fact that, he would be ashamed if people of his color did that. Now, again, if you substitute any other race in that sentence, it's really not bad. I mean, he's certainly not being racist towards any other groups, right? So that's sort of my analysis of that. And by the way, it's fine if you make generalizations about white people just like he did, but in the context of white guys can't dance, white guys can't jump, white guys have no rhythm, white guys are nerdy, and it's interesting how we pick and choose what sort of racial tropes we're allowed to say, the ones we're not allowed to say. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, they're all just making generalizations about people based on their skin color. And if there's any trope you're allowed to say, I would think it's certainly one about your own color, right? So, if a white guy says white men can't jump, it's kind of funny. He's talking about his group. He's joking white guys, who he is, right? And that's less inflammatory than if someone of another color said the same thing, right? Because that's not their group. And the same thing applies to any race. My wife is Asian. When she says, and she makes this joke, if she messes up in traffic or something, and she's like, haha, sorry, Asian woman, which is a trope. Asian female drivers, Asian drivers in general, somehow this stereotype came out. Now, she can say it all day long because she's an Asian woman, right? It's not inflammatory. But if I or some other white person or black person or non-Asian person says it, it's far more inflammatory. So talking about our own groups, who cares, right? So I see a big nothing burger here. I see a guy, if anything, having a very positive, self-reflective event and acknowledging the error in his ways and doing so outwardly to someone else, which, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to actually talk about yourself in that way. So I think what we're seeing here in all these efforts at sort of attacking Tucker and exposing him, it's doing the opposite. It's humanizing him a little more. It's making him more likable. And it's like the Streisand effect. If you guys remember that, the Streisand effect is basically Barbra Streisand bought a house and refused to disclose where it was. All that did was make people want to find it more. So call this the Tucker Carlson effect. people keep putting dirt out on him, all it does is make people like him more. It just humanizes him, makes him more relatable. He's a flawed human. We're flawed humans. I truly don't think the guy has hatred in his heart, the type that people try to paint him as having, being a white supremacist and all this crap. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so that's my breakdown of the text message, which, by the way, again, if that's how he sends text messages, more power to him, because there was no shorthand in that thing. It was long prose written out, just as good as if someone were writing an essay to be published. So, generalizations about his own race, yeah, you may not like that, but at the end of the day, I think it's far more benign than saying, Asian people are good at math. That's using a trope against someone of a different group. I would see that as being far worse of Tucker to say. But if he says, white guys don't do that, okay, that's him placing a level of expectation and demand on people of his color. Like, hey, we don't do that. I think having accountability for your group isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I'll leave it at that, guys. I'd love to hear your opinions on what you think about this. Comment on the video on YouTube or shoot me an email or whatever if you're listening to the podcast. But that's my analysis of the most recent jab at Tucker by the New York Times, which I think this stuff is being put out or leaked by Fox, hoping to smear him. And guys like the New York Times are all too happy to publish it. But I think that they're doing the exact opposite. Whenever Tucker lands somewhere, starts his own independent thing, or joins some other media group, he's just going to be bigger than ever. And it's kind of funny to watch them try to attack him. Meanwhile, he's just living his life, and it's making everybody like him more. Anyway, until next time, guys, keep your minds free.